Okay, so this section is going to be the practice problems for Target 1.1. Remember, you need to have watched the intro to Target 1.1 and the example problems before you do these. And you'll turn in the work for the example problems, and then your work for the practice problems, and then finally the Target earn back questions, which will come at the end of this video. So again, I'm going to remind you of how this works. If you've gotten to this video and you've completed the examples in the intro video, then what I would like for you to do is I have three different types of problems, three for when we use an equation and function notation, three for when we use a table and function notation, and then three from when you look at a graph and use function notation to answer questions. So for this problem, what I want you to do is to pause the video and to watch and to work out these problems on your own. You can just write from equation and then list problems 1 through 3, from the table 1 through 3, and from the graph, and then list numbers 1, 2, and 3 as well on your paper. And then you don't have to copy the equations and the tables and graphs, just answer the questions looking at the video. But what I want you to do is go ahead and pause that video now and go ahead and work on these problems, then just resume play when you're ready to see the answers. Okay, so hopefully you followed those instructions. If you didn't, go ahead and hit pause now. I'll tell you one more time, and work these out on your own before you check your answers. And again, once it's time to check your answers, you're just going to look back, and if you get a question right, put a check beside it. If you got something wrong or didn't know how to do it, then just either make the corrections or work the problem out now. And this will give you a little bit more practice before you move on to the earn back questions, which will not have answers on this video. You will have to turn those in, sort of like a quiz answer, and then I'll grade those, and then if you get that, that will earn your target back as well. So I'm going to start going through these problems and answering them. I'm going to first start with when we are given an equation in function notation, how we answer these problems. So the equation was f of x equals 6x minus 3, and the problem says if f of 5 equals what? So what I have to do is realize what this 5 stands for. Now notice the 5 is inside the parentheses, just like the x is inside the parentheses here. That means my x should be 5. So on my paper I would write out f of 5 equals 6, and I'm using this equation, times, now instead of putting 6x, I'm going to put a 5 in parentheses where the x went, and then I put minus 3 on the end. And as I look at this, I see, well, 6 times 5 is 30, so this is 30 minus 3, and 30 minus 3 is just one number, that's 27. Okay, so my answer, f of 5 equals 27. Alright, next question. F of x equals 57. Now for this one, it's a little bit different because notice the 57 isn't inside the parentheses, it's not the x, but it is equal to f of x. And if 57 is equal to f of x, and 6x minus 3 is also equal to f of x, then that means 57 has to equal 6x minus 3. Alright, so now we have an equation here we can solve. To solve this, I add 3 to both sides. And I'm sort of running out of room on the paper here, so I'm going to sort of write this off to the side. 57 plus 3 is equal to 60, and that'll be equal to 6x. And these negative 3 and plus 3 are going to cancel each other out, so I'm just left with 60 equals 6x. So 60 equals 6 times some number. If I divide both of these sides by 6, then these cancel out, and I'll be left with x equals 10. 60 divided by 6 is 10. So if I plug 10 in my equation, I should get 57. Alright, so this will be my answer for this problem. Now I can check this by going back up to my equation and plugging 10 in for x. So let's try that. 6 times 10 would be 60 minus 3. 60 minus 3 is 57, and that's what we wanted to get. So we know it's correct. Alright, last one here. F of negative 1. Once again, the negative 1 is inside the parentheses, so I know I'm plugging it into my equation. So I'm going to write f of negative 1 equals 6 times negative 1 minus 3. Once again, we put the negative 1 where the x was supposed to go. And that's going to simplify to 6 times negative 1 is negative 6 minus 3. And be careful here. Some people have a tendency to do negative 6 and they think 6 minus 3, well, that's just 3. So they think their answer is negative 3 or positive 3 even. But remember, if you have two negative numbers, the answer is just going to be even more negative, even farther away from 0. So if you imagine that we've gone 6 this way, and now we're going to go another 3 this way, on our number line. So let's say here was 0, then we've gone 6 this way, then another 3. That means we've gone a total of -9. Okay? So my answer here is going to be f of -1 equals -9. Alright? So make sure you check your answers here. Pause for just a second, let you check over them. If you need to make any corrections, again, just pause the video, make the corrections, and then move ahead to looking at the problems on the table. Alright? So now I want to look at a table. Now in the table, notice we have our x values and our f of x values. These are what we call the inputs, the numbers we plug in for x, and the output is what we get when we look at this function. So these are the inputs, these are the outputs. So I see f of 0 equals something. So notice the 0 once again is inside the parentheses. That means it is my input. Inside the parentheses is the input. So I look for an input or an x of 0. Here it is. And the f of x value, so f of 0 would equal 3. Alright? Now this problem is kind of the opposite. This tells me f of x equals -1. Now notice the -1 is not in the parentheses. That means it is the output. It's on the outside of the parentheses. It is the output. So I'll look under the f of x column. Here is -1. And as I look, the x value that gives me an output of -1 is 2. So I would write x equals 2. Now for these, there is no math or no calculations involved. It's simply being able to look at the table and understand what the question is asking and how to answer that by looking across the table at the corresponding x or f of x value, depending on what the problem asks. So this last one, f of -1 equals, once again, the -1 is inside the parentheses, so it is my input, it is my x value. So I look where x is -1, right here, and the f of x value, is equal to 5. Alright? So that's how we work with the tables. If the number is inside the parentheses, you look across at the f of x column, at the outputs, and find that value. If it's on the outside of the parentheses, it's on the other side of the equation, then you're looking for what x will give me an output of that number, as we did here. Alright? So once again, make any corrections you need to, and pause the video if you need to take a second to do that. If not, then you're ready to move on to the graph. Okay, so for the graph, it says, question 1, f of 10 equals something. Once again, the 10 is inside the parentheses. That is my input, and the input is my x value. So, I'm looking for an x value of 10, and it's all the way down here at the very end. Okay, so there's the 10, and I'm looking for the output, the y value, or in this case we call it the f of x value. So f of 10, when I have 10 as my x, my f of 10, my f of x value is going to be equal to 0. Alright? Because I go over 10 and the line has touched down here with an f of x value of 0. So f of 10 equals 0. Once again, we have a problem that's kind of the opposite here. So now it says f of x equals 20. The 20 is on the outside, the opposite side of the equation. So this is my output. It's on the outside. And I'm looking for when does f of x equals 20? Well, here are the f of x values. So here's where 20 is, and I need to come across until I reach my line, the actual graph on the graph paper, or on the grid here. So here it is crossing right here. Now if you look, it's not crossing on one of these grid lines, on these white lines here. But it does look like it's about halfway, if I was to draw a dotted line down, about halfway between 4 and 6. So we have to think, what x value is halfway between 4 and 6? Well, the answer is 5. Okay? So that means if f of x equals 20, then the x that works for that, or the input that we could plug in to get 20, would be 5. When x is 5, f of x equals 20. Okay? Last one. F of 2.5 equals. Okay, now this one's a little tricky, and it's especially hard to see on this graph. So if you didn't get this one correct, or as long as you were close, I would accept it because my graph is not perfectly straight here. So f of 2.5. Now keep in mind, my scale is going up by 2 on my axis. So this number inside, it's in the parentheses. It is my input, which is my x value. So I'm looking for when x is 2.5, what is the corresponding f of x value up here? So if we imagine, if I was to split this in half, because my scale is 2, I'm going up by 2, so now by splitting it in half, that's where the 3 would be. But if you notice, it's still not exactly where this line is crossing. However, if we go halfway between 2 and 3, that's where 2.5 would be. So I want to switch colors here just for a second. Let me pick a yellow color here. Or actually, let's go with pink. And if I go halfway between the 2 and the 3, that's where the 2.5 is going to be. Okay, right in here. And if you notice, that's where it's crossing right here. It actually crosses one of these grid lines. And so when f of x, or f of 2.5, when x is 2.5, my corresponding f of x value will be equal to 30. Okay? So it took a little, it's kind of difficult to see here on a test or quiz. It should be a little more obvious because the lines will be perfect because they've been made, using a computer as opposed to writing on a tablet or something. But that's how we can come up with that answer. So f of 2.5 equals 30. Alright? So make sure you go over, check all your answers. Make sure your answers are correct for these practice problems. They must be correct for these. And then I'm going to give you just a second to do that. Now remember, you can look back at some of your work as you work on the target earn back questions for these. If you can, I want you to attempt to answer the earn back questions on your own without looking back for any help from previous problems. If you would like to take a couple of minutes to kind of study it, look back over it, think you have it, and then attempt to do so without, because that's going to be most like how it would actually happen on a test, where you won't be able to look back at your notes or what you've done before. So what I want us to do is to just sort of put your stuff aside except for the piece of paper that you're working on, and I want you to attempt to answer the next questions on your own. Once you have completed them, remember there's not going to be any correct answers displayed. I'm just going to scroll this down so you can see the problems. Once I scroll it down, I'll ask you to pause the video so that you can work them out. And then you can take as much time as you need to work those out, and then you'll just bring me those earn back questions, these practice problems we've just done completed, and the example problems that I asked you to copy down from the video before. If you have the examples, these practice, and the earn back questions, bring those into me in class. I'll staple those together, and with your correct answers, that will earn back your target. And it's a great way to just review for your EOC. So I'm going to go ahead and scroll this down. Alright, so here are the problems for your earn back. Okay, so I'm going to scroll this up so you can see there are only two questions. One is dealing with an equation, one is dealing with a table. And so I want you to pause this video, work these problems out. Okay, there will not be any solutions posted on here, so you'll just bring me the work that you have. You can write somewhere on your paper earn back questions or something like that, and then put question 1 and 2. Again, you don't have to copy everything down if you would like to, so you can work it out on your paper and maybe do some scratch work and stuff. That's fine, but you do not have to. I just need to see the answers for parts 1, A and B, and for parts 2, A and B. Okay, so go ahead and pause the video now, work these out, and then bring these into me in class.